I thought the hardest part of buying my dream home would be the paperwork. I was wrong. The hardest part turned out to be meeting Brenda, and by the end of that day, the woman who had spent 10 years terrorizing the neighborhood was standing on her own front lawn while a sheriff told her she had 30 minutes to leave. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on what should have been one of the happiest mornings of my life. After years of saving, planning, and searching, I had finally purchased a beautiful home in a quiet lakeside community. The neighborhood looked perfect from the outside. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, friendly-looking houses, the kind of place where people waved at each other. At least that's what I thought. At exactly 8:03 that morning, my moving truck pulled into the driveway. The movers lowered the ramp. I carried my first box through the front door, and that's when I heard a sharp voice behind me. "Excuse me!" I turned around. A woman in her late 50s was marching across my lawn like she owned the place, perfectly styled hair, designer sunglasses, clipboard tucked under one arm. The expression on her face told me she wasn't there to welcome me. She stopped 3 feet away and looked me up and down. "Are you the new owner?" "Yes," I said. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say welcome. Instead, she pointed at my moving truck. "You're violating HOA Section 4.2. I blinked. "What?" "No oversized vehicles are permitted on community pavement." I looked at the truck, then at her, then back at the truck. "We're moving in." "I don't care." I honestly thought she was joking. Nobody could possibly be that unreasonable. Apparently, I was wrong. "We'll be done in a few hours," I explained. "The truck will be gone before lunch." She crossed her arms. "The rules don't make exceptions. Even for moving day?" "No." I laughed. "Big mistake." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny?" "No. I just assumed common sense existed." The movers suddenly stopped unloading. One of them looked down the street. A tow truck was turning the corner. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Then Brenda smiled. And I realized it wasn't. She had already called them. Before she even spoke to me. The tow truck pulled into my driveway. The driver stepped out. Brenda pointed directly at my moving van. "That's the vehicle." I stared at her. "You called a tow truck?" "Of course. We just got here. Rules are rules, honey." Honey. I hate when people say honey like that. Within minutes, the driver hooked the truck. Half my furniture was still inside. Family heirlooms. Boxes containing practically everything I owned. And I could do nothing but watch. The movers stood there stunned. One actually asked if this was some kind of prank. I wished it was. The truck disappeared around the corner. $600. That was the impound fee. $600 before I had even unpacked my toothbrush. Brenda adjusted her sunglasses and smiled. "Maybe next time you'll read the bylaws before buying property here." Then she walked away, confident, arrogant, certain she had won. What she didn't know was that I had read the bylaws, every single page. In fact, I had probably read them more carefully than anyone else in the neighborhood, because I'm a real estate attorney, and during the title search for my home, I had discovered something very interesting, something Brenda desperately hoped nobody would notice. At first, I ignored it. It wasn't my problem. I was buying a house, not conducting an investigation. But after watching my moving truck disappear down the road, suddenly it became my problem. I went inside, opened my briefcase, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents I'd received during closing. Most people never read these records. I do. Occupational hazard. One document concerned a property owned by the HOA, specifically the house where Brenda lived. The neighborhood called it the President's house. Everyone assumed it belonged to her. It didn't. The property was actually owned by the HOA trust. According to the governing documents, it existed for one purpose only, to provide housing for a licensed on-site community caretaker, not an HOA president, not a board member, a caretaker. There was just one problem. Brenda's caretaker license had expired 3 years earlier. 3 years. Yet she had continued living there, rent-free, without authorization, without qualification, without legal occupancy. Technically speaking, Brenda was squatting in an HOA-owned property. I looked at the documents again. Then I smiled. If Brenda wanted to play by the rules, we were going to play by the rules. All of them. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the HOA's legal counsel. The second was to the county sheriff's office. Then I waited. About an hour later, Brenda returned. Apparently, towing my truck wasn't enough excitement for one morning. She was carrying another clipboard, another violation notice, another power trip. She walked up my driveway and taped a citation to the front door. $50 fine. Reason? Improper trash bin placement. I hadn't even unpacked the trash bins yet. That was when I heard tires crunching on gravel. A sheriff's vehicle pulled into the neighborhood. Then another. Brenda immediately straightened up. She probably thought they were there for someone else. The lead deputy stepped out, looked at a document, then walked directly toward her. "Brenda Harrison?" Her smile vanished. "Yes?" The deputy handed her an envelope. "You're being served with an immediate occupancy violation notice." "What?" "The property you currently occupy belongs to the HOA Trust." She laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." "No, ma'am." The deputy pointed toward the paperwork. "The HOA legal department has confirmed your caretaker authorization expired 3 years ago." Brenda's face turned pale. "I am the HOA President. That position does not grant ownership rights." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. Neighbors began appearing on porches. Doors opened. Curtains moved. People sensed drama. And in HOA neighborhoods, drama travels faster than Wi-Fi. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. The deputy continued, "You are currently occupying the property without legal authorization. This is ridiculous. You've been ordered to vacate. You can't do this." The deputy remained calm. "Actually, ma'am, we can." The silence that followed was incredible. For years, Brenda had been the person issuing warnings, writing violations, threatening fines. Now she was the one receiving official paperwork, and she hated every second of it. The HOA board members arrived shortly afterward. Apparently, my phone call had sparked a panic meeting. Once they reviewed the records, there wasn't much debate. The documents were clear. Brenda's license had expired years ago. The board had simply never checked. She had quietly remained in the house while everyone assumed she was authorized to be there. Not anymore. An emergency vote was held right there on the sidewalk, in front of everyone. The result was unanimous. Brenda was removed as HOA President, effective immediately. The crowd actually applauded. That was probably the moment she realized how unpopular she had become. People weren't shocked. They were relieved. One neighbor told the board he'd received over 20 violation notices from Brenda in a single year. Another said she'd fined him because his holiday decorations stayed up one day too long. Another claimed she once threatened legal action over a garden hose. The stories kept coming. Years of resentment poured out all at once. Brenda stood there, speechless. The empire she had built through intimidation was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By sunset, the moving company had returned my truck. The impound fees were reimbursed by the HOA. The new board personally apologized, and across the street, Brenda's belongings were being loaded into a moving van. The irony was almost too perfect. There it was, a giant moving truck parked directly on the pavement, exactly where mine had been parked that morning. Nobody called a tow truck. Nobody cited a violation. Nobody complained. The truck stayed there for hours. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, I watched Brenda load the final boxes. For the first time all day, our eyes met. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing left to say. She had spent years using rules as a weapon, years believing those rules applied only to everyone else. But eventually, every bully makes the same mistake. They assume they'll never be held accountable. Brenda learned differently. Because if you're going to weaponize the rule book against your neighbors, you better make absolutely sure you aren't violating the biggest rule of all. And that's how the HOA president who towed my moving van in the morning became the former HOA president moving out by sunset.